Hi, this is Paul, little viewer Meryl. Hi, Paul. I'm a wife and mother of 3 in San Diego. She enjoys YouTube videos while she's doing housework and cooking. And after seeing Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris's lectures from London and Dublin, she saw my videos and she enjoyed it. And she said, while commenting on Sam using the yardstick, he seems, as you correctly demonstrate, to derive yardsticks from the Bible, apparently not noticing that he does. How do you describe studies in morality from the Greeks and the Romans before Christ? What would you say was their yardstick? They do advocate temperance, fortitude, courage, prudence, and doing good. In fact, you will hear Sam Harris a number of times in these videos laud Marcus Aurelius, which I find interesting. He's lauding a Roman emperor who wrote a significant book on Stoicism that had a great deal to do with morality. One might ask who his son was. Just do a little Wikipedia and find out who Commodus was. But anyway, what's behind that? Very many ways, this is the big point Jordan Peterson is making, that what we're dealing with are gods. Okay, and my conversation with Jonathan Pajot, we talked about principalities and powers and the reality of these gods. And this is probably one of the most important portions of the 4 videotaped conversations between Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris.
So here's my question for you, is if we agree that there is some way in which religious texts carry some kind of value because they allow people to figure out how to navigate their lives in ways that might reduce suffering, reduce the complexity of the choices that they have to make.
Now, Weinstein, this is a point that Brett will be making multiple times, and he's made it in other videos. He basically says, you can find this in the Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan conversation with Brett Weinstein in it. Okay, so I get the idea that religions encapsulate wisdom from the past, and this wisdom should have utility for us. We can learn from it, and all we have to do is sift and figure out which wisdom is no longer contextually healthy for us. Now, implicit in this is an idea of what morality is, and it's the idea that morality is that which promotes survival, okay? That which promotes survival and well-being, to throw in Sam Harris's words. Now, Brett is a very sharp guy, but I wonder, by this question, and he's trying to bring Sam and Jordan together, and Sam, of course, won't have it. But Peterson's main point is that it comes way before this. It isn't just religion as, and this is a very secularist way of approaching religion. Religion are these books where we hear about supernatural things and gods. It's pretty much Sam Harris's take on it. But religion, as Peterson is saying, religion is built into us. We have, in a sense, quotation marks, the gods within us. These have been built into us. And so if you ask me what is God, this is part of this a priori structure that I bring to this world as place, and Struan, place of nouns, and this place of space of objects, these values that I bring to it that help me immediately sort and evaluate and place in a hierarchy this world of near infinite numbers of facts. And this is the a priori structure that we don't generate ourselves, that has been built into us biologically, that has been built us, and Brett Weinstein gets this because he talks about these kinds of issues. But this isn't us sitting apart from religion and evaluating it, because in fact, when we're doing this thing that Sam Harris is doing by picking up a Bible and saying, oh, this is horrible, those are the gods within him condemning that. And so what Jordan Peterson is trying to get at is, where do these gods come from?
Presumably, you will agree,
and I'm going to go get a drink.
Would be
I'll be right back.
An evolutionary interpretation, that the fact that the stories themselves are
Yes.
functional would provide an advantage to those who were deploying them.
Yes.
So here's the problem. Isn't it then also true that those stories are responsive to past environments? And so the claim that these things might be timeless would be suspect. And
Yes.
in fact, you would expect a spectrum of durability. Some stories would be right in a brief moment and...
Yes.
Okay.
All that's true.
All that's true.
So far, so good.
Well, so far so good. This is actually, I think, quite excellent then, because what we have is a recognition that there is something to these belief systems that has to do with practical realities in the past, and we also have an acknowledgement that we cannot trust in these things based on simple faith, because even if they can be certain to have worked at some point in the past, we don't know what their relevance is to the present.
Right. Okay. Fair enough.
All right.
So Peterson is saying, yeah, we evaluate these. This is, in a sense, Peterson's logos at the top, and it's built into Christianity, and this is the process we do.
And I would say that's two things about that. That's exactly why we're having this discussion. And
Peterson would say, in a sense, we're all Christians sitting here with the logos at the top of the hierarchy, and we're evaluating what's going on. And of course, Brett and Sam would say, nah, Christians? Really? Yeah, we're acting like Christians because we put this at the top of our hierarchy. In a sense, the intellectual dark web is a highly Christian organization in terms of the Christianity that Jordan Peterson sees. In fact, you might say that what really holds them together is the logos at the top of the hierarchy that is helping them bring order to chaos. What did Eric, Brett's brother, when he defined this thing? This is a sense meaning structure, and Jordan Peterson says that's the logos. This is a logos thing.
And you see, what happens in the most profound of such texts is the idea that the process by which your knowledge is updated has to occupy a position in the hierarchy of values that supersedes your reliance on dogma is the fundamental claim. That's why, for example, in Christianity, the notion is that the word is the highest of values, and that's the embodied word, and that's the thing that mediates between order and chaos, and everything else has to be subject to that. And I would say that's not a claim that's unique to Christianity. So, for example,
okay, I think because we're being told we're out of time here, so I want to give Sam his reaction to that as well, and then we'll move on to Q&A.
So Jordan Peterson, his life work is to understand this. Is to understand these a priori structures. That's what he's looking for, and maybe if we can find them, we'll be transparent to ourselves, and then maybe, well, that's. That maybe we're going to have to get into.
Well, I'm tempted to just ask Jordan a question here. I mean,
and Sam won't play.
Hard to know what to save for tomorrow night, but I feel like we've got 3,000 people sitting here who would really like an answer to this question.
And if you... One video that Peterson tweeted out was my video where I compared Jordan Peterson to one pretty early on to The Office, and I again, Peterson's not being disingenuous. Peterson is telling us exactly what he believes, choosing his words carefully. But do you believe in God?
You say you believe in God. You have been...
No, I say I act as if he exists.
You say what?
I say I act as if he exists,
okay,
which is a much more precise claim.
Okay, so then what, but in this case, so you act as though God exists.
Yep.
And in addition, I've heard you say that I act as though God exists, that I can't really be an atheist.
So far it seems that.
Right, yeah.
We'll see.
The night is young.
Yeah.
But again, pay attention. For for Weinstein and Harris, God is out there. Religion is out there. This is something that is, it is a fact, is an object out in space, something I can evaluate. And Peterson's saying, no, God is back here. He's a priori. He's built into all of this. And so then Sam rightly finally gets to the really good question, what do you mean by God?
So in that sense, I'm not really an atheist. I've heard you say this. So that
Well, some of you is.
well, if I were really an atheist, I would be far more poorly behaved than in fact I am. Right? I would be like Raskolnikov committing murders and assuming there was nothing wrong with it.
It would be more likely, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So
Wait, that's a big distinction.
I need to know.
Would be more likely.
What was that?
It's a big distinction. That you would is very different than it would be more likely. Taking the safety off the gun is not the same thing as shooting it, right?
Yeah.
The temptations laid open to Raskolnikov would be more at hand.
Okay.
Now remember this viewer letter. What difference has the flow of human history since the Greeks and the Romans made in Sam Harris?
As they were to him.
So what in that? So in what sense do you mean? What is the God that you act as though he, she, it exists? And what is the God-shaped thing I must have in my life to prevent me from being a quote real atheist?
See, and even the way Sam is such an evangelical atheist. I mean, the God I must have in my life. And Peterson wants to keep saying, no, Sam, you already got this. It's built in. Your chattering rider on top of the elephant just isn't paying much attention to what the elephant is doing.
Well, okay, first of all, I have to point out that there's no possible way I can answer both those questions in 2 minutes.
Well, it's the same question.
But,
I mean,
yeah,
what do you mean by God?
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you some of the things that I mean by God. Okay?
We do have to get to questions.
Maybe we're going to do this tomorrow.
Yeah, maybe this is where we start. Oh, God. Well, that was a pretty resounding no.
It seems like that constitutes an audience question, wouldn't you say?
All right, I tell you what. Let's let's do this, but let's be deliberate about time.
Okay. Well, I'm going to read some things that I wrote because it's so complicated that I'm not sure that I can just spin it off the top of my head, and so you'll have to excuse me.
Peterson cracks me up.
And what I'm going to do is sort of paint a picture by highlighting different things. So now I already made one point here. I made the point that part of the conception of God that underlies the Western ethos is the notion that whatever God is expressed in the truthful speech that rectifies pathological hierarchies. And that isn't all it does. It also confronts the chaos of being itself and generates habitable order. That's the metaphysical proposition.
Okay, so in a sense, he's saying this is the God we're practicing right now in this intellectual dark web gathering that we're doing.
And that's best conceptualized as at least one element of God. And so I would think about it as a transcendent reality that's only observable across the longest of time frames, the longest of iterated time frames, to your point. So here's some propositions, and they're complicated, and they need to be unpacked. So I'm just going to read them, and that'll have to do for the time being. So God is how we imaginatively and collectively represent the existence and action of consciousness across time.
Pay attention to the sentence. God is how we. Okay? So this is the God that is manifest through us together. All right? This God is not only inside of me doing things, this God is inside of us doing things.
As the most real aspects of existence manifest themselves across the longest of time frames, but are not necessarily apprehensible as objects in the here and now. So what that means,
I'm just going to explain.
In some sense, is that you have conceptions of reality built into your biological and metaphysical structure that are a consequence of processes of evolution that occurred over unbelievably vast expanses of time, and that structure your perception of reality in ways that it wouldn't be structured if you only lived for the amount of time that you're going to live.
Now this is God aspect 1. Okay, and what's interesting about this, which I just kind of thought as I was listening to it, and this is part of the reason I listen to these things again and again and again and again, because when I go through them, I hear more and more and more, and as long as I'm drawn to them. So this is, the God in quotations in me, which is exactly the way Socrates talked. These are the gods, these are the spirits, this is what's motivating, what's moving, what's doing this. It's a very classical way of conversing that Peterson is doing, but this God that Jordan Peterson is talking about was active in all of those millions and millions of years of people watching each other and shaping. And this is God. The Apostle Paul quotes a pagan, "In him we live and move and have our being." God is working in all of these things. And so again, you have to pay attention to what Jordan Peterson means by God. Again, I've used God aspect 1 in this, but he'd say, this is God. Of course, God is all over the place.
And that's also part of the problem of deriving values from facts, because you're evanescent and you can't derive the right values from the facts that portray themselves to you in your lifespan.
One term for understanding what this a priori structure is God. Okay? Jordan Peterson's God. God in quotes here. God is that which within us filters this stuff. Now that's a very difficult way of talking for secular people. But as Jordan Peterson is trying to map this a priori structure, he says, here it is. And functionally, if you look at how the word is used, this is God.
Which is why you have a biological structure that's like 3.5 billion years old. So God is that which eternally dies and is reborn in the pursuit of higher being and truth. That's a fundamental element of hero mythology.
And so again, pay attention to what God is in that little sentence, what is died and reborn. So God could be a dream, God could be a hope, God could be an identity. God, this is, and so then mythology, Jesus, the dying and rising God. And I have so many videos in my head and nowhere near enough time to make them because I'm going through N.T. Wright's Gifford lectures, and boy, they connect with some of this stuff pretty well.
God is the highest value in the hierarchy of values. That's another way of looking at it. God is what calls and what responds in the eternal call to adventure. God is the voice of conscience. God is the source of...
Okay, God is what calls. And so again, when I talk to people, I've been doing a lot of conversations lately. I've posted some of them. I don't post all of them. They're not all appropriate for YouTube. But God is that which calls you. And again, the ancients knew this. Verizon Lisa calls her to get a smartphone. God is that which moves you to... I talked to a guy, a German who's living in Vietnam, and God called, what is that which calls us? Well, it's the universe, and it's well, is it inside of me? Is it between us? And it's all over the place, Jordan Peterson is saying.
Judgment and mercy and guilt. God is the future to which we make sacrifices, and something akin to the transcendental repository of reputation. Here's a cool one if you're an evolutionary biologist. God is that which selects among men in the eternal hierarchy of men. So, men arrange themselves into hierarchies, and then men rise in the hierarchy. And there's principles that are important that determine the probability of their rise. And those principles aren't tyrannical power. They're something like the ability to articulate truth and the ability to be competent and the ability to make appropriate moral judgments. And if you can do that in a given situation, then all the other men will vote you up the hierarchy, so to speak, and that will radically increase your reproductive fitness. And the operation of that process across long expanses of time looks to me like it's codified in something like the notion of God the Father. It's
codified in something like the notion. Again, so God is an idea, but it's more than an idea. It's a motivation. And I had my conversation with Jonathan Pajot, and we were talking about angels and demons and principalities and powers, and when I talk to Jonathan again, I want to come back to this, because in a sense what he said, which is true, that if something is sufficiently powerful and sufficiently complex, and it's bearing in on our lives, we naturally personify it. And you're going to hear Brett Weinstein do that in a minute here. We naturally personify it. And so Verizon Lisa, when she says, universe, the universe is sending me to buy a smartphone from Verizon. I should get Verizon, be a sponsor for my channel. Why not? And Amazon, boy, Amazon, you should sponsor this channel. But this is how we talk. This is how we respond. And every time you hear someone use a phrase like genetics want, well, it's personifying it. And I know I haven't forgotten the viewer mail here. We're going to get to that. But I just want us to notice that this impulse of personification, now, of course, critics and atheists of religion have been saying God is merely that personification. But how do you know that? Because it's indistinguishable from agency and personhood. And in fact, as we go into the AI conversation, that is one of the tests. Can we fool a human being on the phone? And we're practicing this out now. You get robocalls sometimes from computers, and you listen carefully, and computers are still pretty dumb. You can kind of trip them up. You can say, "Are you a computer?" Or you can, do something with it. But notice the patterns here.
It's also the same thing that makes men attractive to women, because women peel off the top of the male hierarchy, and the question is, what should be at the top of the hierarchy? And the answer right now is tyranny as part of the patriarchy, but the real answer is something more like the ability to use truthful speech in the service of, let's say, well-being. And so that's something that operates across tremendous expanses of time, and it plays a role in the selection for survival itself, which makes it a fundamental reality.
Jordan, if I can I just cut in here with one question?
I'll stop with that for now.
What? So I was not hearing in that list of attributes a God who could care if anyone masturbated.
Okay, so again, Harris goes right to agency and his imagination, a big man in the sky, even though the Ten Commandments say, don't image me that way. Sam is going to go there. And I think there's a connection between Sam Harris's atheism and imaging God in that way. In other words, the Ten Commandments are prophetic. And it's really a phenomenal thing in the Ten Commandments when God says, do not image me in anything that is within the creation. Okay? How about words? It's complicated. But Harris is saying, well, what about personhood and agency? Now, first of all, I don't think he's really comprehending that, again, this is a priori. This is before everything. Peterson's point is that this is built into us. Right now, Sam, you are acting this out, even in this moment, even in this position. And is it true that something that is, indistinguishable, it amazes me too, because Harris is the one who keeps talking about us developing computers that feel and have morality. And I'm thinking, you're really hyper on this line about personhood, but you're thinking we're going to transcend it with computers. Well, what's with that?
I was not hearing a God who...
Depends on what else is stopping you from doing, Sam.
So I was not hearing in that list of attributes a God who could care if anyone masturbated. I was not hearing a God who...
Depends on what else is stopping you from doing, Sam.
Sorry, I missed that.
I said it depends on what else it's stopping you from doing.
Well, okay, so it's
yeah,
important to live. It's important to do something other than masturbate.
Yes. Yes, which actually constitutes a problem for many people.
Which is harder than it sounds.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you apply Jordan Peterson's guy that he just used, the dude that's masturbating all the time isn't going to get the girl, isn't going to get any girl, because they're too in love with themselves. Well, now to Narcissus.
I'm not hearing a God, a personal God who can possibly hear anyone's prayers, much less answer them, right?
And again, I don't know why I got on this point in this video, but what's really interesting about the atheist objection to God is, what is its motivation? Is it pride? Because if you accept that systems can get sufficiently powerful and complex that they become indistinguishable to our capacity to differentiate agency from program, well, what happens to your line of God as number one and number two? Now, actually, later on, the question of the ontological location of God then becomes actually quite a bit more important. But from below, when we're looking up, even though Harris and Weinstein will come out much more in the atheist side of the line by saying, there isn't anything up there, they both act as if and talk as if things which they regard as not having agency have agency. And again, we're going to hear Brett Weinstein do this in a few minutes.
And I'm wondering what percentage of religious people who would say, oh yeah, I believe in God and it's the most important thing in my life, what percentage of those religious people do you think have in mind a God of the sort you just described?
I don't know, Sam. It's a good question, because when I go talk to people, when I talk to people online and use exactly this terminology, millions of people listen. So it's not so obvious.
And this is a really important point that Peterson makes, because he says, basically within this conversation, within this point that Peterson's been making, he's been saying God isn't out there. I mean, we all want to put God out there and evaluate him and make our judgments about him and decide whether he was moral or immoral and so on and so forth. That is such a naive thing to try to do when God is, at least Jordan Peterson's God, this a priori God, he's already built into your systems. Then you get the Genesis story. He's molded you out of the stuff of the ground and breathed his life into you. And Sam Harris is like, well, this isn't the God that we're talking about. Well, read this book. This is Soul Searching by Christian Smith, and he interviews many teenagers and asks them questions about their God. And what you discover is that the actual God of these children, of these young adults, now they're adults, the actual God of these adults has nothing to do, or fairly little to do, with the gods of their respective religious tribes, because he interviews Muslims and Baptists and Reformed and Catholics and atheists and spiritual but not religious. He interviews across spectrum, and basically what he says, for the most part, the real gods that are determining all the kinds of things that Jordan Peterson is talking about here have very little to do with the gods that the people are actually talking about. When you say, why would that be? Because they have been formed by all of the kinds of things that Jordan Peterson has been talking about that form us, that create the gods within us.
What percentage of people see it this way? It may be that they have the intuitions, but they haven't been articulated well.
I mean, this is the problem. This is what worries me about this. So, you could do the same thing with the idea of ghosts, right? So people traditionally have believed in ghosts. It's an archetype, you might say, the ghost. Survival of death is certainly an archetype. And we know what most people most of the time mean when they say they believe in ghosts. And
I've listened to him make this argument I don't know how many times, and each time I listen to it, I think this analogy doesn't really have much to do with it. But if you penetrate it even more deeply, and you're a materialist, what do you think ghosts are? You say, well, they're just in your head. That's what we say dismissively. But okay, let's grant you that. Well, where do the ghosts come from? They're not that far away from the God Jordan Peterson is talking about.
And I say, I don't believe in ghosts. And you say, no, you do believe in ghosts. Ghosts.
And what's a little funny is that later when Sam is trying to define fact, well, ghosts are a fact. Because you could map someone's brain when they're thinking about a ghost and find the articulate, whatever.
Are your relationship to the unseen. That's a ghost. So you have a new definition of ghost that you're putting in the place provided, which I have to say, well, of course I have a relationship to the unseen, so yeah, I guess I do believe in ghosts. You win that argument.
But what's astoundingly interesting about Harris's analogy here is that he's exactly wrong. This is exactly the ancient definition of the gods and of the spirit world and of spirits that come in and inhabit us. This is exactly the definition. And if you're a materialist, this is where ghosts come from.
But that simply isn't what most people mean by a ghost.
But what most people mean, they don't mean. This is how people are.
Yeah, but you can't use that simplified argument about my conception of ghosts as an analogy for the propositions that I just put forward.
This is what I see you do. I mean, maybe you have more to say on the topic of God, but this is what I hear you doing with God. You have defined the God that most people believe in, and we know this is the God that most people believe in.
I was asked what God I believed in. Not
yes,
what
no,
most
but
people
I'm asking.
And again, most people, Sam, someone made the point to me that Sam cut his teeth debating American evangelicals, and that Sam needs to get out more.
Asking you what percentage? Yes, but you by shifting the definition, you have robbed the noun, the traditional noun, of its traditional meaning, and you're imparting to people a sense.
They need NT Wright on this stage, because they need someone who knows history, because they even need a classicist, because they haven't changed it. Now what's about to happen here is interesting, because if you watch these enough times, you'll see often, because I listen to them most, and then when I watch them, which hasn't been near as often, when Peterson wants to chastise Harris, he chastises the audience. Well, that's interesting.
Wait a second.
I'm not so sure.
What do you mean by
this.
Traditional meaning? Look, it's one of the elemental claims in the Old Testament is that you're not even supposed to utter the name of God, because by defining it too tightly, you lose its essence. And so let's not be talking about what the classical definition of God is here, okay? It's a historical non-starter.
And again, right now, this is why I listen to these things, because as I listen to them, I learn more things. And Peterson's point here, I made the point about you may not image God with a graven image, and you may not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Imaging God with language is even.
Okay,
And there's plenty of religions that
can I check in with the audience? Is the audience all right with us continuing down this road? Okay. So, can I jump in here?
You're sacrificing your Q&A.
So
He's such a dad.
Oh, yeah, that it is at the expense of Q&A. That's what you're giving up, but I think it's probably worth it. So, let me say, Sam.
And Peterson should not have apologized, because, quite frankly, even though it's constituted and articulated in a different way, in an externalized way, Peterson's axioms are pretty darn close to the ancient assumptions of gods and how they worked.
I do not believe in a supernatural God, but the God that I heard Jordan just describe, I do not have any difficulty understanding why he might care if you masturbate, and I also don't have any trouble figuring out how he might answer prayers.
Well, tell me more.
Well, I can tell you how a prayer might be answered.
Okay, but these are...
Well, it's specific, so you could let me do that.
So it'll be interesting. So I'm not Jordan. We've not talked about this. If I heard an answer from him that actually would satisfy...
And this is the point. A phenomenological narrative of prayer, of asking God and getting an answer. Peterson's basically continuing to say, you don't need a supernatural, you can be supernaturally agnostic and fully appreciate this without being dismissive. Maybe this is how Peterson is doing it.
Satisfy me as to what the mechanism of action might be. That'd be pretty interesting. And if he can tell me what I heard, I think it would suggest that we're not just making up stories here.
Okay, so you might like this, you maybe not, but well, it's possible. Okay, so imagine that. Okay, so let's imagine that
Peterson just cracks me up.
You laid out. Okay, but let's put the extra twist in it, because one of the things that we both decided, I think, was that you also have to build in the intent into that. So let's say the hell that we're talking about isn't the victim of the terrible massacres that you laid out in the Jungle Story, but a perpetrator. Okay, so someone who's actually acted in a malevolent manner, truly malevolent manner. Okay, or maybe perhaps we wouldn't have to take that extreme case. We could say, well, perhaps you've decided that, any of you've decided that you've seriously done something wrong. Okay.
Okay, right there. Remember earlier he said God is the voice of conscience. Well, now you might say, well, conscience has been developed into me by watching my parents, watching this sociocultural construct, watching people that I esteem and society esteems, and so puts them into movies and stories and holds them up as examples, and my sense of conscience is constructed from the bottom up. Well, then God is that which you feel. Okay, and again, the Greeks, they would understand that. They wouldn't use that language, but nothing in there is unintelligible to them about this.
And that you want to get away from hell. You want to make things better. Okay, so here's an exercise you can try. So what you do is you sit on the edge of your bed and you say, okay, what I did was wrong. And you have to really believe this, right? So you've thought about it. It's killing you.
Okay, now pay attention here too. What are we doing? We're doing a liturgy. You're sitting on the edge of your bed. You're talking. Who are you talking to? Now, one of the questions I get from a number of you who write me and want to talk to me is prayer. And you say, well, I don't know how to pray. Well, how to pray? Well, Jordan Peterson's telling you. It's talking. Well, I feel weird not talking with someone else in the room. Okay, why? Is it pride? And so now, again, this is from below. Jordan Peterson is saying all of this is built into us. And if you understand the unconscious and the subconscious and how all of this works, you don't need anything above to make sense of this. And that's what Brett Weinstein is saying. That's what Jordan Peterson is saying. And Sam Harris just doesn't want to go there. Well, why? You have problems with people sitting on the edge of their bed and talking? Does that break the law for you, Sam?
It's killing you. So now you're penitent. And
what's driving you to that? Well, it's your conscience, and that conscience is constructed. And so, and again, now I'm just talking from below here. This is Peterson's project.
Confessing, let's say, and you're confessing to yourself as much as to anyone, and you say, I really want to know what I did wrong, and I really want to know what I could do to put it right.
You're hearing Jordan Peterson at prayer, because the way he's talking about this isn't terribly hypothetical. This is a man who was formed as a little boy during the Cold War, even in a mainline church, but it got in. God got built in, and in fact, we would say he's been built into the society. He's been built into movies. He's been built in. And so here's Jordan Peterson at his prayers.
And I'm willing to accept any answer that will manifest itself to me. Try that. See what happens.
Well,
that's a prayer that will be answered, and it won't be answered in the way that you want it to be answered. I can bloody well tell you that.
Okay, but that...
Well, what are you communicating with when you do that?
That's right. What are you communicating with? You say, well, there's no one else in the room. Okay, but what are you communicating with? And how do you get an answer? And how do thoughts arrive? I mean, again and again, Sam Harris will say, well, that's a fiction. That's a fiction. But I ask, well, where does fiction come from? A muse? Well, you don't want to use that word. Now you're, well, again, if that which is so powerful, maybe even immaterial, maybe just the culture, your upbringing, all of it's manifested within you in the intersubjective, it becomes so powerful and so complex, the only language you have capable of engaging with it is personification. And again, Weinstein's going to go there. Verizon Lisa goes there. It's indistinguishable from persons. So why are you as an atheist saying there's nothing there? It's pride. You're fighting a battle against what?
That is something that is a process that I'm familiar with. It doesn't require any supernatural explanation, and it certainly doesn't.
And Peterson's just said that. It doesn't require any supernatural explanation.
Require that we imagine that any of our books were dictated by the creator.
And he goes there. But Sam, this God that Jordan Peterson is talking about, wrote the books too. Because he wrote the books, he wrote the music, he built the churches. Again, now I'm talking from below, all right? And at the end of the video, if I don't erase this one, we'll get to the limitations of that. But again, in Jordan Peterson's scheme, he affords all of that. And it's just this tiny little bias, this tiny little atheist bias that says there's nothing there. And Jordan Peterson kind of shrugs. You don't know that there's nothing there. Most of you will admit that. You can't know that there's nothing there. What is the motivation within the gods of Western culture that makes you want to keep your pride by denying this God that you imagine any ontology?
The universe.
I didn't say that it required any supernatural explanation or that it required the book. I was asked to provide an instance of prayer that worked. And that's what I did. I didn't do anything other than that.
That's fully understandable in terms of human psychology. And
it's not understandable because we don't know where the answer comes from.
Well, we don't know where anything comes from.
That's true.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. But that doesn't open the door. I mean, one thing we can know with absolute certainty is that whoever wrote the Bible didn't know either. And there's many other things.
He says, one thing we can know with absolute certainty. Really? Is this fact Sam Harris? That, all of the things that we know with absolute certainty are fact, and upon them we construct it? Show me that. Does it have an address? Does it have a location? Can you stick a stopwatch to it? Can you stick a tracker to it? Can you locate it with a GPS? I don't think so.
He or she didn't know, like everything else we know scientifically, right?
It's not so obvious what people know and what they don't know.
No one even knew the brain was involved in any of this, right? So
yeah, but they probably knew about as much as we do about how the brain was involved in it.
But we've already established in some tenuous way that things that nobody understands could have evolved into these stories in some way that would be useful, but nobody knew what they were writing when they wrote it, right?
The problem is that you can
No, Sam. The problem is you just don't want to. Well, what are your gods that make you not want to?
Again, this has been focused through the lens of your attachment to Christianity, largely, but Hinduism is a completely different.
Now we're going off on red herrings. Okay. Whoops. I wasn't going to do this again. Your a priori God. You have values that were formed in you before you knew it. By watching your parents, by receiving the welcome and unwelcome action of others. Someone did something to you that you didn't like. Someone played the God card on Sam Harris, and we have to listen to his hang-ups again and again. By watching your peers, by seeing how others got status and pleasure and wanting it for yourself. That's a huge one. That's a motivational one. Someone else got status. Someone else got pleasure. Someone else got something that you wanted. And so you're doing it too. These are the a priori gods long before we look at a God way out there. And so when you look at the stories of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, that's what those stories are talking about. Demonstration. Your conscious self sits at the children's table of your consciousness committee. Okay? The rest of your brain puts your conscious self at the children's table. And you know why this is. You walk on a path through the woods, and your mind sees a snake. Your eyes don't even register. The rest of your brain doesn't even inform your conscious self until it's already made you shoot back. And it says, oh, by the way, something moved. Go check it out. The master and his emissary. The conscious self is the emissary in many ways. Is that the rest of your brain says, the rest of your brain is an ancient family, and Father said you better go check that thing out. I already moved you back, but yet it's like when I grew up before there was a lot of seatbelts around, and if you're sitting in the front seat with your father driving the thing, it was like whoom, the arm goes back. My father was about my size. He was a big man. It just plastered you to the back of his seat because there's no seatbelt, and he didn't want you flying through the windshield. Well, my father didn't consciously think that. His foot hit the brake, his arm went there, and I got plastered to the back of the seat, and the car stopped, and there was no accident, and everything was cool. But all of that happened. And the conscious self later, these are scientists here. Well, the systems of your adrenaline gets rushing, and everything speeds up, and your conscious self sits at the children's table, and our brain doesn't let our conscious self really drive the car much. It's the rider and the elephant. You walk into a room, there's a table and a chair, you see walls, chairs, table, you see a can of soda, and you see a Bengal tiger. Boom! Later you'll think about, why was a Bengal tiger in that room? But not at the moment. Your body revs up. This is the structure. It's the a priori system. These are the gods that save you. Is it right that Jordan Peterson uses the word God for this? And Sam Harris says that's not how everybody uses the word. No, Sam. Throughout most of human history, that's how most people use it. And in fact, even evangelical Christians, if they walk into a room with the Bengal tiger and they quickly step back and close the door, they'll say, God saved me from the tiger. And Sam said, no, he didn't. You better listen to Jordan because he's on to something. Well, he shouldn't use God for that. No, actually, it's about the best word you can think of to use for something like that. You're a priori. I messed up the conjunction. The contraction. See, my conscious mouth shouldn't be given anything. There are hard structures. We have two hemispheres of the brain. We have aspects of the brain that will make us jump back before the snake comes. And there are soft structures, and the gods are embedded in the cultural stories that move you. I'm sorry, I get chastised by some of you for being too hard on Sam. So I'll try not to be hard, but I get really frustrated with this because to me, Peterson's right. The gods embedded in the cultural stories that move us. The gods are all around us. If you go to Calvin College, well, maybe I'll pour some more books off the shelf. Can't find the book. You'll get courses on cultural discernment, which means going to the movie and finding the gods in the movie. It's like, where's Waldo? Where are the gods in the movie? Well, there's the spirits of the age. They're the principalities and powers. They're the factors and dynamics that are so persistent in culture. The ancient people personified them because they were so thoroughgoing and powerful. And again, this is even how Freud describes them, for Pete's sake. And Harris is kvetching about the words, but they're not real. In what way are they not real? They govern our behavior. We personify them as gods. They're the communal gods in active hierarchies, and this is politics and religion. And now Harris wants to say, but my structure is love. And that's why in the previous video I said, and Peterson nails him on it, says, it's just Christianity, Sam. It's just Christianity. No, it isn't. Sam says love, but Peterson's been asking, what, here, I messed up your again. What are your a prioris that shape what you see? What are your a prioris that shape what you see? Now, it's amazing that we can try to go back to that level and ask ourselves. And in fact, what a conversion is the flipping of those a prioris. And that's why religious conversions change us so deeply. Because once we get down to reshaping those a prioris, well, everything looks different. What does C.S. Lewis say? It's the sun that I see the world by. What happened in C.S. Lewis's conversion is the whole world looked different. John Calvin says scriptures are like lenses we put on our eyes, and we see the world differently through them. These are the gods. This is the religious strata. Religion isn't something we hold out here and examine and say, I don't know if this is sufficiently moral. Starts way, 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 way before that. Sam's definition of love is a function of his God and the gods in play in this world. Well-being. Is it loving to vaccinate your child? Is it loving to limit your child's screen time? Is it loving to have an affair? What's all built into that? Sam says love for all, but why? The emotional reward for pleasing others is built into him and us, but how much of that is hardware, some of it, and how much of that is software in terms of the structures that have been built into us? Every day we prioritize love for some and certainly pleasure for ourselves over the well-being of others. And if you don't believe that, have a child, because a child will teach you just how selfish you are, because that child is all need and all demand, and it is ruthless in its demand. And you very quickly learn if you don't meet the demands and needs of that child, it won't live. And then who are you? The gods are all manifesting themselves in you. Christianity, well, that's a man dying for his enemies and on the cross saying, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. Is that Sam's Hindu ignorance? Does Christianity not also understand that aspect? I would argue that Christianity both understands evil as ignorance and evil as willful rebellion, because both themes come through strongly in the Bible. And when Sam says, well, Hindus understand evil as ignorance, I'd say the Bible understands evil as ignorance, but it also understands evil as willful rebellion and hatred. It has both ideas. And Sam says, yeah, but Hindus say the one idea trumps it. Okay, so it's a lesser religion. It doesn't see as much of the world, I would argue. Sam pleases his audience and allies by humiliating and correcting his adversaries. That's what he does. Now, to get back to the viewer mail, Plato's Republic. Plato's Republic is all about well-being. It's all about the good. It's all about justice. What makes a just society? And Plato says, well, it's really hard to see in an individual, so we'll blow the individual up and imagine a city. And if we imagine a just city, then we'll be able to see justice in the big scale, and then we'll be able to know what it is to be a just person. There's a communal sense of well-being and meaning at sacrificing one's individual interests for the good of the tribe. So in Plato's Republic, even though one of Socrates' interlocutors says there has to be relishes, basically you're a worker ant in Plato's Republic. If that's your role, that's your role, and you stick with it. And you should find joy in it. Now, there are many cultures throughout human history where this has become the gods within them, and, they're a worker ant. And I live in California, and there are many people of Asian descent that still have significant parts of their Asian cultures within them. I remember I was at a church meeting, and we had a bunch of different groups. We had a Hispanic team, and we had a Korean team. And the Hispanic team made the observation that, yeah, we're like the Koreans in that we have a lot of hierarchy. We have patrons, and we have, there's nobody is ever on the same level in this Hispanic hierarchy. The only difference between us and the Koreans, we don't obey orders. I thought that was just hilarious. Especially once they're in America. Well, now it's the big me. It's all about me. It's Robert Bellah, another sociologist. Robert Bellah saying, this is American culture. We look at Plato's Republic. How do we evaluate Plato's Republic? Oh, this is tyranny. This is like East Germany. This is horrible. If you step out of line in Plato's Republic, you're out of the city. Your meaning, your being. Well, what are the gods of the city? The gods of the city are manifested in the order of the city, in the polis, in Greek society. That's not what Sam believes. Sam would look at that and say, well, that's religious tyranny. That's what he called the atheistic Russians. Well, that's your measuring stick. You say, okay, Sam, where'd you get that measuring stick from? Did you get it from the Greeks? Well, we get some ideas from the Greeks. You know, we kind of look at Plato and say, well, he had a lot of cool ideas. You're going to follow his idea of what a good person is? Of what a good city is? No. One of the best conversations, and this is what I wrote to Person, is this one. Well, listen to this.
Tell us where your interest in the whole classical age really began. You've sort of...
So, Tom, your internal gods, how did those lead you to become a classical historian?
Been doing this all of your adult working life, haven't you?
It goes right the way back to childhood, and I was the kind of child who loved dinosaurs. I liked them because they were big and they were fierce and they were glamorous and they were extinct. And my interest in I suppose in the Roman army and then by extension the Roman
is of
Empire.
A similar nature.
Well,
yes.
it was a seamless movement from Tyrannosaurus Rex to Caesar. And so the kind of the glamour and the beauty and the power and the cruelty of the Greeks and the Romans I found very appealing. Yeah. And in
now, how would Sam judge the Greeks and the Romans? I don't know how much history Sam reads. Sam lauds Marcus Aurelius. Interesting choice.
Contrast to that, although I went to Sunday school and I was very, very interested in biblical history as well, I found them all a bit po-faced, kind of. I didn't like their beards. I preferred kind of the clean-shaven look of Apollo, and so in a way I was kind of seduced by the glamour of Greece and Rome, I suppose. And so
those gods were inside of him, and those gods worked on his desire. What do you want, young Tom Holland? I want to be glamorous. I want to be powerful. I want to. These are the formation of the gods within.
The first books I wrote about of history were about Greece and Rome, and in many ways, the appeal, particularly I think of Rome, is that in certain ways they do seem very like us. So you were talking about Cicero's letters, and this is a man who, is worrying about property prices. He's worrying about the weather. He's bitching about
Sounds
people.
Very British, doesn't he?
Yeah. So in all kinds of ways, he seems very familiar.
Yes.
But the more you live in the minds of the Romans, and I think even more the Greeks, the more alien they come to seem, the more frightening they come to seem. And what becomes most frightening, really, is...
Now, pay attention to the gods, because, well, a good Freudian would say, well, the gods are a projection of what's in them. Well, how did what's in us get in us? It's happening back and forth.
A kind of quality of callousness that I think is terrifying because it is completely taken for granted. There's a kind of innocent quality about it. Nobody really questions it.
And what sort of form did that take?
Well, if we're in the age of Cicero, Cicero's great contemporary Caesar is, by some accounts, slaughtering 1 million Gauls and enslaving another 1 million in the cause of boosting his political career.
And we're freaking the heck out because of Donald Trump. But Caesar, he gets a pass. Well, why are we freaking out about Donald Trump? Well, something has formed us. Something has shaped us. Some gods have snuck within.
And far from feeling in any way embarrassed about this, he's kind of promoting it. And so when he holds his triumph, people are going through the streets of Rome carrying billboards, boasting about how many people he's killed. And this is a really terrifyingly alien world. And the more you look at it, the more you realize that it is built on systematic exploitation. So the entire economy is founded on slave labor.
Right.
The sexual economy is founded on the absolute right of free Roman males to have sex with anyone that they want, any way that they like. And in almost every way, this is a world that is unspeakably cruel to our way of thinking. And so this worried me more and more. And it was kind of like, I was thinking, well, you know, I'm clearly not, as I'd vaguely imagined, the heir of the Greeks and the Romans in any way, really. And so where am I coming from? And it was like a kind of itch, you know, you get on your back and you can't find it. And this was then enhanced for me by then writing a book about late antiquity and the emergence of Islam from the late religious the religious and imperial context of late antiquity, and again finding in Islam a profound quality of the alien. That, you know, there were aspects of Islam that were very familiar, but there were many aspects of it that again seemed deeply alien. And I began to realize that actually in almost every way I am Christian. And I began to realize that actually Paul, although in many ways he seems a much less familiar figure than Cicero, the kind of, you know, urbane man with his property problems. You know, Paul never had any property; he just made tents. Yes. That in almost every, you know, what is it? Seven. That is the 7 letters that are
people
conventionally people absolutely accept.
Yeah.
That, you know, and as Tom Wright was saying, you know, this is not a very lengthy amount of writing, but compacted into this very, very small amount of writing was almost everything that explains the modern world.
Well, the Western world, as we take for granted.
Yes, but also the way that the West has then moved on to shape, you know, concepts like international law, for instance. So the fact, you know, concepts of human rights, all these kind of things, ultimately, they don't go back to Greek philosophers. They don't go back to Roman imperialism. They go back to Paul.
Some
and
of the humanists
Paul really
and atheists,
is, you know, his letters, I think, are, along with the 4 Gospels, the most influential, the most impactful, the most revolutionary writings that have emerged from the ancient world.
When you penned that article, I think it was for the New Statesman, where you said what I got wrong, and you sort of came out, as it were, and said, as far as my values and, you know, background are concerned, I am a Christian.
Yeah.
It was interesting to see the response to that, because I saw lots of atheists and humanists saying, "Oh, hang on, you know, democracy, that goes back to the Greeks. You know, don't pretend that Christianity gave us everything."
Democracy goes back to the Greeks? Yeah, kind of. But again, the totalitarianism of Plato's Republic, would any of us really want to live in the ancient Greek world? Would Sam Harris be morally comfortable within the polis?
We're grateful for. But you honestly think that actually people simply haven't appreciated just how much we owe to Judeo-Christian?
I think I mean, if we're talking of Paul, I think of him as a kind of depth charge, deep beneath the foundations of the classical world. And, you know, it's not anything that you particularly notice if you're, you know, in Corinth or Alexandria. And then you start feeling this kind of rippling outwards. And, you know, by the time you get to the 11th century in Latin Christendom, everything has changed. And you have this, I think essentially what Paul's significance is that he sets up ripple effects of revolution throughout Western history. So the 11th century, where with the papal revolution, essentially it establishes this idea that society has to be reborn, reconfigured, that vested interests have to be torn down. And then the Reformation, what we call the Reformation, is a further ripple effect of that, and the Enlightenment is a further ripple effect of that. And very interesting. You know, it spilled out so much that now in the 21st century we don't even realise where these ripple effects are coming from. We just take them for granted.
I can hear Tom Wright. You want to come in and
I'm going to bring in Tom Wright when we do the Gifford lectures. But yeah, our ancient heroes. The gods. Well, okay. Now let's talk representation. I wanna get into some Plato's Republic, and I want to get into Augustine's City of God. And the complaint of the ancient pagans was that the Christian God has displaced our gods. Yeah, that's exactly. Now, Tom Holland is not a Christian. That's exactly what Tom Holland is saying. That this Christian God was an invading God, and he got in underneath, and our basic orientations of morality were deeply shaped by this. And there's I can't remember his name now. There's a Glenn Scrivener. I might talk to him. I hope I get a chance to talk to him. The Bible critiques the Bible. And this is what happens in the ancient world. And Paul goes off like a depth charge. And the Greek and Roman gods, they get pushed to the side. And this God of the Hebrews comes up, and it changes. And Sam says, oh, that's a bad thing. Sam, you really want to go back to life like it was during Marcus Aurelius? Do you want to know Commodus? Do you like where that's going to go? It doesn't seem very rational to me. So Sam Harris's vision, though, is a static one. Sam imagines there's a universal moral vision structure that will transcend every soft structure development, and I think that's what Sam Harris is saying. Peterson disagrees. I certainly disagree. Sam imagines the world will be universal to human beings and in many ways static. This is how he critiques the older moral systems and has yet to detail this system. But now Peterson's got a problem in here too. So let's imagine he fulfills his quest. Let's imagine he exhaustively details out the hard and the soft structures. Let's imagine that Peterson is so successful in his project that human beings, we are now transparent to ourselves. Now, actually, Peterson notes in many ways that this is probably impossible because we can't be transparent to ourselves. But here's the point. My dog isn't transparent to me. Never mind a human being, which is so much more complex than a dog. But even animals aren't transparent to us. At this point, what do you have and why? Let's imagine we can do this. What do you have and why? But really, why do you want it? Now, Think Club did a good piece on debunking rationality rules. And he went into that and he said, Peterson has his Darwinian truth, and I've talked about that in past videos. In a sense here, the goal of when you listen to Brett Weinstein and Jordan Peterson talk about, well, okay, if we can get a handle on these ancient gods that you pray to on the side of your bed, and if you can really get a handle on this, if we can maybe take religion out from behind us and bring it in front of us, and really be able to look at it and see it in order to evaluate it. But again, that's part of the issue about not being transparent to ourselves. If we can take it out here and evaluate it, and that's part of thinking, by what standard do we evaluate it? Well, in a sense, they're both saying we have to evaluate it in terms of our survival. We have to deal with climate change. We have to deal with the threat of nuclear war. We have to deal with, at our meetup, someone said, how long will it take before people can, on a home printer, print out a virus? And I thought, oh gosh, are we going to be facing that? All of these threats, okay? How are we going to navigate our way through the Fermi paradox filters that are ahead of us, through AI and through all of these threats that the more we know, the more we now know we are threatened by, the more we appreciate that we're still alive today. But Brett Weinstein says, okay, we've got all this ancient stuff and we're going to have to reevaluate it. But what's the criteria for reevaluating it? And it's survival. Okay. What survives? So that's where you get the question of, well, AI embedded Borg-like creatures with our technology, with our neural link built up. Is that us? Right away, now we switch to telos, or goal. Darwinian truth is really seen in Peterson's telos, or goal. If the structures we've developed have become transparent to us, These are all the past structures. And Brett Weinstein starts by saying we have to reevaluate these, reevaluate them in terms of, this is where you get to rationality, what can help us survive into the future. And this is what we do with conversations, and this is Jordan Peterson's logos. We're gonna keep doing this thing, but we don't know because we've never been in this environment before, and our environment is changing so quickly. So if the structures we've developed become transparent to us, these are all built into the past. Then we should be able to do better in surviving into the future. That's the wish. But as Brett Weinstein began with, we don't know because those are all tuned to old environments. So now, surviving past environments doesn't necessarily ensure we'll continue to survive. And Weinstein worries about this a lot, and he's got a fair number of videos out there talking about this. Peterson can't penetrate the problem of random versus design. Why? We can't penetrate the problem of random versus design. Why? Because I said before, if you have a structure that is sufficiently powerful, in other words, it permeates our lives, and it's sufficiently complex, like we're talking about AI potentially becoming, personal agency and a machine that is transparent to us may become indistinguishable. And that's the whole test of, am I talking to a robot or talking to a person? So then how do we have to respond to it? Well, you might say, well, Sam Harris says, don't respond to it as if it has agency. Don't respond to it as if it has ontology. Don't respond to it in that way because that's what? Dumb? It's natural. It's human. We do it. Sam Harris says, well, that's obsolete. How do you know it's obsolete? In fact, the more we learn about how even the people on this stage very quickly talk about what genes want and how we're going to evaluate ourselves as assassin robots, where are we going to go with this? These are indistinguishable from agencies and persons. All right? That's our new context. Peterson can't penetrate the problem of random versus design. If you go back and you watch the transliminal interviews, Peterson talks about, well, organisms survive because of random selection. We don't really know that either. There's real problems built into that too. We know that some survived and some didn't. Some think about it as walking through a maze, but it's not a maze. Most of the time we look at mazes, we look at them from the top down. Think about going through a maze that you're in. Here's a doorway, right or left. Well, and we're doing this as community. And individuals are having more and more power. So you might say, I promise never to nuke the world. Well, your finger isn't on the button. Well, whose finger is on the button? Well, we elect them. Well, so we're all traveling through this maze, and this maze of selection. And some go off into dead ends and die. That's the story of natural selection, right? We say this is random. But again, as I've mentioned in videos in the past, there's no such thing as random. When we say random, what we mean is indistinguishable complexity that we can't penetrate. Well, isn't that exactly what we're facing on top? We're facing complexity coming down to us, and it's sufficiently powerful and important that the only language we have to deal with it is personified. Verizon Lisa says, universe, thanks for bringing me to the Verizon store. It's indistinguishable. So is randomness. It's indistinguishable. This is why Peterson's an agnostic. He's smart enough to figure that out. So we walk through the maze. Some parties get lost and die. Others make it. But there's still more maze ahead. And if you've done breadcrumbs and you know it's right, left, right, left, left, right, right, left, left, right, that may or may not help you in the next choice you have to make. But now pay attention to our language. Who is we? So the party that went off down the dead end, are they we? Are the communists who killed 100 million people, are they we? See, this is where Peterson gets interesting, because when Peterson goes to Auschwitz, he doesn't go there and say, oh, those terrible Nazis. He says, I'm capable of this. The proper way to go to Auschwitz is to say, I killed the Jews. Well, Jordan, you weren't even alive. What are we doing? What are we doing with we? What gods are involved? Listen to all the conversations and keep asking yourself, who is we that they're talking to? Was it we who got lost in the maze? Will we get lost in the maze and nuke each other? Are our enemies part of we? What if we are the AI machines that replace us? In other words, you might say, well, we are the robots that replace us soft, short-lived carbon human beings. That's we. Well, where do we get these groupings? These groupings are expressions of values, and the values are, well, where do the values come from? We're back to the a priori values. We're back to the gods that we inherited in hard and soft structures that get manifest all around us, these axiomatic gods that Peterson is saying. Now we get to the limit, surviving the death of we. If the gods are a function of our brains, that's what Sam Harris can agree with, they will not survive the death of the substrata. If the gods are this intersocial layer, once all the people are gone, they're gone. Well, maybe the machines will replace it. Well, the machines host that, but you keep going back and back and back. You get the material death of the universe. Why on earth did we come up with a God? Come up with? Did we come up with him? Or did he reveal himself to us? Why on earth did we come up to a God that is beyond our we? That is beyond, and again, it's going to be indistinguishable from that which is sufficiently powerful and complex. Sam Harris says, he ain't there. Probably not. And this again is where you go back to the resurrection. And this is why Peterson answers the resurrection question the way he does. He says, I don't know. And he gets backed into, well, probably not, but you can tell his heart's not in it. I don't know. Maybe. We don't know. Who's we? You need a mind above the matter. Now you might say, well, that's not there. How will you know? What does it make sense to live by? Now, the book of Ecclesiastes says we have eternity in our hearts. We desire to see above our moment. That's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to see above the maze, right? So we can look at the maze, because then we can chart our course. Well, we desire to see above the moment. Jordan Peterson can't offer, but he's open to an idea of fulfillment, saying, what if in fact there is a mind above the matter? What if in fact we're not based on matter, but created by something else? Well, how would you do this? Well, the only way to do it is to get down to the level, to the degree that you can, of the a priori filters through which you see the world. Well, how can that ever happen? It does happen. It happens all the time. That's what religious conversion is. You retrain the elephant. Well, and that's what happens when you get converted. You have to relearn patterns. You sit on the edge of your bed and you feel guilty about other things. What you do trains an elephant more than what you say. The rider chatters. The elephant hears a lot up there, but doesn't pay much attention because the rider's always chattering. Yet, in community, the chattering orients us. And so that's really where the language comes in. We get oriented with each other. And every time Sam Harris comes down on, there is no God, and it's made up stories, and it's fiction, and blah, blah, blah. Well, he's trying to orient the community. And what he's trying to stop Jordan Peterson from doing is resisting that line of argument, because Sam Harris wants to use language to orient the community. And language is an effective tool, but it's not the only tool, because all this stuff is so much more deeply embedded. Now, Peterson wrote part 3 of his response to Harris, and is really helpful, but it's more of Peterson's tortured text. Well, what do I mean by Jordan Peterson tortured text? Well, when he really gets into his nerd mode and starts writing, it's you just like he describes how he wrote Maps of Meaning, you have to slow way down, and it's like Mo Meaning Mondays, my friend's channel, Note in the Network. It take each word at a time and think it through. What's he saying? What's he trying to do? This is tortured. It is laborious to try and get all this stuff in. And you might ask, well, how on earth could we have been living this out for thousands of years when the vast majority of people can't make their way through this tortured text? Well, actually, what this tortured text is trying to describe is to answer that question. We're trying to, again, make these a priori gods transparent to us. Enter Piaget. This is from this. And this, as I would answer, what is church? Well, we know how, which means how to act to transform the mysterious and ever-threatening world of the present into what we desire, okay? And we're going to have to get into Augustine. Long before we know how, we know how. In other words, you don't need to read the torture text. You're doing this as a child even before you know what you're doing, because again, this was built into our hard structures and our soft structures. We know how, or why we know how. This is to say, for example, that a child learns to act appropriately, assuming it does, long before it can provide abstracted explanations for or descriptions of its behavior. The gods are in us. A child can be good without being a moral philosopher. This idea echoes the development of psychologist Jean Piaget's notion with regards to child development that adaptation at the sensory motor level occurs prior to and lays the groundwork for the more abstracted forms of adaptation that characterize adulthood. And in that little section when Jordan Peterson is talking about a prayer, we're probably seeing little Jordan, 6 years old, chastised by his mother, feeling terribly guilty about something that he's done. Well, there's a liturgy. And he's practicing it. And little Jordan can't write this. Big Jordan will write it. And at the edge of his capacity, as he keeps telling us. But little Jordan can do it and can manifest it almost seamlessly, almost naturally, almost easily, without understanding this tortured text. That adaptation at the sensory motor level occurs prior to and lays the groundwork for the more abstracted forms of adaptation that characterize adulthood. Piaget regards imagistic representation as an intermediary between sensory motor intelligence and the higher or more abstract stage of formal operations. Furthermore, he believes that imitation, the acting out of an object, serves as a necessary prerequisite to such imagistic representation, portrayal in image or word instead of behavior. The process of play appears as a higher order or more abstract form of imitation from this perspective. Piaget presents two main theses. The first is that in the field of play and imitation, is it possible to trace the transition from sensory motor assimilation and accommodation to the mental assimilation and accommodation which characterizes the beginning of representation. The second, that the various forms of representation interact. There is representation when an abstract model is imitated. There is representation in symbolic play, in imagination, and even in dreams. The systems of concepts and logical relations, both in their intuitive and operational forms, implies representation. This sounds like crazy stuff, but you know what he's talking about? He's talking about church. And this is the funniest thing again about Jordan Peterson. He doesn't go to church. And after reading this and understanding what Piaget figured out, well, how does he want to change his elephant? Well, train his elephant. Well, he figures, I'm going to do it on my own, and I'm going to do it in the abstract, and I'm going to work really hard, and I'm going to think about it really hard, and I'm going to read lots of books. Oh, that's great, and I'm grateful for it. He helps me learn. But most people can't navigate this tortured text. So, what do? Well, they act, and they watch, and they listen. And there's a reason Sam Harris's team hasn't won the day, and I don't think it will, because It's not how people are. And it's not even how Sam is. And the gods, the a priori gods within Sam, have been formed and shaped by him. It's already baked in. Now he's hoping to influence later generations, but actually Sam's tribe is about 100 some odd years old, at least, and really can't seem to get beyond a certain level. Well, that's it for this tortured video. This is my second attempt, and it's late, and I'm tired. And I used some, maybe my little confession. I used caffeine to stoke the fire and keep me awake and get this video over the edge. So to go all the way back to how would you describe studies in morality from the Greeks and the Romans before Christ? What would you say was their yardstick? Look at their gods. They were successful. I'm not going to dismiss them completely. But now we get into N.T. Wright and his Gifford lectures. We can talk about progress. But, yeah, you decide. Were the Greeks moral? Were the Romans moral? Do you want to go with Marcus Aurelius and his son? Let me know.